Thank you for coming. I know there are a lot of cool talks, so it's cool that you're here. I am a PhD candidate, but really I'm just a third year in sociology at Stanford, and I am studying the survivor and victim labels or identities. Okay, so my research question is, how do individuals make sense of the survivor and victim labels and incorporate them into their identities? So that is the research question I am setting the stage with. And then a little bit of background. And I am used to presenting in front of sociologists, so this might be very basic for a lot of sexual violence scholars. So thank you for bearing with me. So, as I'm sure many of you know, survivor is increasingly common, often replacing the use of victim. And I actually first got the idea for this project back in 2014 because I was an activist on campus. I was talking with my friend about a journalist, and I said that they had done a bad job, and my friend asked, oh, did they use the V word? Like she wouldn't even say victim, and I just could not figure out why we cared that deeply, and so I looked into research, and I couldn't really find any. We have research on the stigmatization of victim and victimhood, especially in relation to different kinds of interpersonal violence. And then on the survivor identity, we do have some research on survivors of illnesses such as cancer or mass violence such as holocausts, but I couldn't find any empirical work on the survivor-victim, just a lot of theoretical work. So survivor is meant to be empowering. That was, as far as I can find, the intent behind the adoption of the term. Meant to be empowering and to kind of contradict the stigmatization that we found with victim. And it has been a feminist push to use this term, and it's been widely adopted, especially on college campuses. So we know that there is a perfect victim narrative, as Estelle Friedman, historian Estelle Friedman, points out clearly in her book Redefining Rape, and that the perfect victim narrative applied to specific types of people, including white women, generally virgins or sexually pure white women, and only of penetrative rape, and usually the perpetrators were men of color or men of lower class men. And so this perfect victim narrative idea we have established in the literature, and we sought to combat it, as a lot of this conference talks about. So I also found stuff on all unacknowledged victims, and the idea behind that is that there are people who experience what we consider definitional rape but do not identify it that way. And a review by some psychologists, Laura Wilson and Catherine Miller, found that roughly 60.4% of people can be considered unacknowledged victims, but even when we use this, we're assuming people like that they should identify as victims. And so there's a disconnect between the identity label and the experience, as well as as unacknowledged victim shows the experience label. As I mentioned before, victim is stigmatized, associated with self-blame and blame from other people, and contributes to silence and underreporting, so I'm not denying the existence of that. And then a recent study by Seamus Khan and colleagues out of Columbia found that he didn't look at the survivor-victim identities, but he did find that people had struggled to or label experiences as sexual assault because it interfered with their sense of self as strong, reliable people. So that's just some of the background. My methods, real quick. Interviews. They got Amazon gift cards and a list of local resources. I struggled with the Stanford IRB. I'm still struggling with the Stanford IRB for this. I can ask questions about my methods and also about the breakdown of my participants. The racial categories are not mutually exclusive, and this is kind of what I have so far. Again, happy to answer more questions. I don't talk a lot about this. Oh, crap. Okay. So, my key findings are that the experience and the labels don't necessarily go hand in hand. So again, with the unacknowledged victims, so people who maybe are sexually assaulted or harassed, don't necessarily label that, and they also don't necessarily label themselves as survivors or victims, and sometimes they will consider themselves survivors or victims, but they don't use the sexual assault label and the other way around, so there's not a clear connection. A victim was considered not healed, weak, self-focused, and passive, whereas a survivor was healed, strong, an advocate, and active. The passive-active distinction was really huge. And then I have some quotes. For a long time, I might skip that one. Yeah, so Jenny had an interesting case. So she used the active-passive distinction, as did many of the respondents, but she said she didn't feel like a survivor because survivor sounds more active, and I don't feel like I actively did anything during the assault. So while most people define the active-passive distinction as how they responded post-violence, for her it was during the violence. So she didn't feel like a survivor because she was not active enough while she was being assaulted. Also want to make clear, no one loved the term victim, but few embraced the term survivor, which I was surprised by. And so far, the only two who have also were white women who had been involved in sexual violence movements, but I don't feel like I have enough to say anything conclusively about that yet. I'm just keeping an eye out. People also often liked the victim to survivor idea, like at first I was a victim and then I became a survivor, which you can kind of see earlier with the distinctions. A survivor is healed, and some people judged others for not moving on fast enough, so there was judgment if you were still in the victim bucket. And then others had moved beyond survivor, so they said, I was a victim, now I'm a survivor, and now I've fully moved on, and I don't use that at all. But that was rare. This is a quote from Andrea, identifying the process. It's moving on, it's taking care of yourself, you're strong, you're ready to advocate for others. I don't know if that's in here, but she does say that at another point. And so I call this the perfect survivor narrative, so analogous to the perfect victim narrative. So they had a clear schema of what a survivor was, and often they didn't feel they had healed or moved on enough to be a survivor. So they were in like limbo between victim and survivor. And they didn't want to be seen as a broken victim, but they also didn't want to have to perform strength as a survivor. But they expected to be survivors someday. All right, I think I'm out of time, I assume. Haha. Okay, so this is an ongoing project. I want to recruit more. I only have one man in my sample. I would love to recruit more men. It's been very difficult, cis men, and I have some gender non-binary people, but would like to recruit some more, expanding on the racial diversity. And then when I ask people to talk about their identities, I'd like them to like draw pictures about it so we can kind of see the hierarchy part in practice a bit more. Since so far it seems like white women were the only ones to really embrace survivor and really put it at the top, but I would like to explore that further. And also exploring more how people see the perpetrator, because some people were like, well, I can't be a survivor because if I'm a survivor, he has to be a perpetrator, and he's a good man. So, and that would be kind of like, I had them unpack it a bit, but they would say that like that. Made complete sense as a full statement. So I want to look more at that, and how they consider the perpetrator's identities in relation to labeling the experience and identifying as a survivor or victim. That's it. Those are backup slides, because that's what all the academics seem to have.